Good evening. Welcome back for Mercy Night number 3. If you've been with us, you will know, but if you haven't, small reminder. This past year, we have been talking through, and by year I mean Advent, this past Advent, we have been walking through what it means to have a Eucharistic culture. Our first night together, we talked about what culture is and what a Eucharistic culture might look like. Last time, we talked about reverence in its relationship with the Eucharist and how it helps us to create an authentic culture. Tonight, I would like to talk about Eucharistic devotion. Now, devotion is a strange and powerful word because it means a multitude of things. It means, at first blush, in our common English language, it's about an attitude or mindset, an emotion even, that this person is devoted to LSU, or the Saints, or the Texans, Cowboys, or whatever shenanigans we get ourselves into. I'm devoted to this person, which is often shorthand for fanatical devotion. He's very devoted. No, he's not. He is fanatically devoted. Those are different things altogether. We just use one to be polite to mean the other. However, in the Catholic faith, devotion is the second meaning. It means all the things that it means in the secular use of English, but it also can mean a particular religious practice. So there are devotions. The devotional life of the Church includes things like the Rosary. It includes things like Eucharistic adoration. We're going to talk more about that later on as we go through the evening. So there is devotion as attitude or mindset, and then there is devotion as practice. Now, before the Second Vatican Council, the devotional life of the Church was rich and deep. And even now, you might feel overwhelmed by the number of potential available devotions. Pick one or two and do those things. This is not about doing all of them. This is not about ranking them and doing the most important ones, the best ones. This is not about even what I would ordinarily say in this matter. These are tools in your tool belt. I want you to have access to all the tools. Because it's not. These are more like parts of a meal. Or, legs of a stool. Which of the legs in the stool is the most important? Well, in theory, whichever is the weakest one is the most important, because that's the one that's going to fail, right? But all of them, they're all equally important. You got to have all of them, or the stool doesn't work. Some parts of a meal may be more important than others. Certainly, the meat and potatoes is the part we care about most. But if one wants to live an authentic and healthy life, you got to have all the portions. To be a real adult, you have to eat your vegetables. Simple as that, right? And to live an authentic human life, you also get to eat dessert and have your coffee. Not everything needs to be merely about nutrition, nor merely about doing all the difficult things. There are many things you get to enjoy. And sometimes our devotions, when they are combined with devotion, the attitude, can be much more enjoyable. But that attitude will sometimes go away. That confidence will sometimes go away. And the things you used to do with great fervor may now be difficult. Okay. But you still got to eat your vegetables. Just because you don't like the thing doesn't mean it's not worth doing. So to give us a few little examples, what do I mean by developing devotion? St. Francis de Sales, the patron of our diocese, wrote an incredibly important book called The Introduction to the Devout Life, which kind of sort of serves as an individual retreat, but your retreat master is St. Francis de Sales. And the idea was that he was collecting the advice he'd given to the women that were writing to him, asking for spiritual advice, and put it all in one place. here's how you live the authentic life of devotion. And what he is specifically going out of his way to say is it's not that you're developing this love, this emotional infatuation with the Lord, as if being driven only by your emotions is a way to found the rest of your life. But instead, educating your soul so that your emotions reflect reality. When you're afraid of something you shouldn't be afraid of, when you're afraid of something you shouldn't be afraid of, your emotions do not reflect reality. We want our emotions to reflect reality. We want our devotions. You can change the way you feel, not directly and not quickly. But over time, you put yourself in the right place, you will fall in love with things that are good for you. I know this is not the most holy example, but it is a good example. When one first tries a new, good bourbon or scotch, if you've never done that before, it is an unpleasant experience. And only over time, the same is true with wine and coffee and dark chocolate, right? At first, all you taste is the bitterness of the chocolate or the coffee, or the alcohol in the alcohol. But over time, you become accustomed to that. And then you can start to detect the subtle differences between this blend and that brand. And then all of a sudden, what used to just be overwhelming is now not only pleasant, but enjoyable and sought after. This is what it means to cultivate devotion as well. Certainly, an hour of silent Eucharistic adoration may not be available to everyone. It may not even seem good to everybody. It may not even seem possible to everybody. But I guarantee you this is one of the things that an hour of quiet contemplation would do us all a good way. Is it an acquired taste? Absolutely. Is it good for everybody? I don't know. Not as a daily practice. Is it good for some? Absolutely. It is definitely good for some. I'd like to leave this there for you. We've talked about what a devotion is, both as an attitude and what a devotion is as a practice. I'd like to highlight what are some Catholic devotional practices that are not necessarily Eucharistic, because I'm going to spend a whole bunch of time talking about Eucharistic devotions, but just to get an idea. Things like genuflecting in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. Of course, that's a Eucharistic devotion. I've already shot myself in the foot. Praying the Rosary. Praying the Synodical Prayer. Praying the Liturgy of the Hours. Making the sign of the cross as you travel in front of the church. Making the sign of the cross when you interact with something that is difficult, disturbing, demonic, or dark. It's actually a practice given to us from the most ancient parts of the church. And you might make the sign of the cross as a way to ward off darkness. And it is great when you watch some of these old movies, and the nuns, they discover a person who's died in their room. The little nun walks in the room and goes, oh, oh, as if to drive away the dark spirits. But imagine, when you encountered something you were afraid of, if your trust in the Lord was based on God, I don't know what this is, but you take it away. That's a practice given to us. This is what we mean by devotions. Certainly we don't do this here, but in other parishes, we have the devotion to the Sacred Heart. And that's done every Friday. Or technically it's supposed to be done the first Friday of the week. Most parishes will do it every Friday. The devotion to Our Lady of Perpetual Help. It's a series of prayers. That's all it is. It's a simple practice. In my own life, the one that is most attuned to me is what comes out of St. Louis de Montfort's True Devotion to Mary. To every day, wake up and offer a morning prayer that's akin to something like this. Lord, today I desire to be your servant. Conform me to your Sacred Heart through love of your Mother. I offer you to Our Lady, through Our Lady, all that I am and all virtues, my sufferings, my merits. I hold nothing back. That's a devotional practice. Really simple. You saw how long that took? That was all of 30 seconds. But it's the core of his spirituality. It's the core of his way of living with Jesus. This is what we mean by devotion. It's practice. Now here's the core of devotions. Devotion as practice is meant to develop devotion as attitude or disposition or emotion. The two are supposed to educate each other. So I can tell you, don't point at nobody, don't beat your chest, don't raise your hand. But some of us, the people gathered here, there's an eloquent way to say what I'm trying to say, and you're just not going to get it, right? There are some of us who the praying of the Rosary is not a good thing. Not because the praying of the Rosary is ever bad, but because my practice of praying the Rosary is so disorganized and so disheveled, and more importantly, so automatic, that it does not build the devotion, but instead tears it down. That's when you know something's come off the rails. Not that you should stop. It's not what I'm saying. But it's time to reevaluate why you do this thing that you do. So that you might put the train back on the rails. So that this devotion might actually build some devotion in you instead of tearing it away. What does that mean? Okay, return to your roots, slow down. If you've gotten to the point where you're saying, again, don't point any fingers, but there are some people who will pray for an hour. And not because they decided to spend an hour gazing upon the Lord, but because that's merely how long it takes them to read all of their prayers. I could see how some of that stuff becomes a little rote. Or even worse, you start to say them more quickly for the sake of saying more of them. When that starts to happen, it is time to simplify. Hey, look. In the entire history of the church, there have been three major, I can't think of the word. Restoration is not quite the word. It's not renovation. Reform, there we go. There have been three major reforms. All of those have almost always been joined to a reform of the liturgy. Mostly because when you're cleaning house, okay, let's clean this up too. You know what the most common reform in the liturgy has always been? We got too many saints. There are literally thousands and thousands of saints, recognized by Rome, written in their books, in their rolls. You can't do all of them. You can't. You cannot celebrate and honor all of these people. So every 400 or 500 years or so, the church goes, okay, this has gotten out of hand. We have no what are called ferial days, which is a day in which the universal church is telling you that you can celebrate whatever Mass you want instead of celebrate Mass in honor of this saint. And you know what the church does? She just takes some out of the list. They're still there. You can still offer Mass for them. But I don't know who St. Elswith of Gundersheim is. And I probably don't care a whole lot about his life. But I guarantee you, there's probably a little church in, middle of Croatia that cares a whole lot because he was their pastor. You can imagine, that's a really important feast for them. But it has nothing to do with the ancestral Catholicism that came up here. So if even Holy Mother Church can simplify her devotional life by pulling back on some of the celebrations of the saints, you can stop saying a few of your prayers for a few days. Clear your palate. That's all it takes. Do a few less. And do just a few. And do them very well. Pay attention to the words. Let yourself fall in love with this thing again. If you never have new thoughts about the prayers that you're praying, that's probably a good sign. It's time to simplify. hearers. Build it back up for them. Okay, that's devotion as an attitude. That's devotion as an action, and that's devotion that is the action is supposed to build the attitude. Okay, what does it mean to have Eucharistic devotion? Well, it's a certain amount of gratitude we might have for the great gift that the Lord has given us. There is a certain amount of desire for the Eucharist, especially when you cannot have it. You know, one of our nursing homes had an bout of COVID recently. And even though we've been able to celebrate Mass there for about a year, not even a year, about half a year, all those people for all that time had no access to communion. Suddenly had access to communion on a regular basis, and then all of a sudden don't have access to communion anymore. Now, the COVID is over. We went back and we celebrated Mass with them. Everything is fine. But you can imagine in some of those people there was now a built-up desire for the Eucharist that was not present before. Because we made you yearn for it. And that's good. Even when that yearning is thwarted, it's there. It's a really good sign. Because it builds your desire for the future. Gratitude for what the Lord has done. A certain amount of desire or yearning or awe. Another great element of Eucharistic devotion and piety is the recognition that this is the completion of the sacraments of initiation. It is the consummation of your relationship with Jesus Christ. And I have chosen my words very, very, very carefully. That analogy has been used through John Paul II and many people throughout all time. For us who live in the celibate state, the act of prayer, the reception of communion, the celebration of Mass, and the life of the sacraments constitutes our marital embrace of the Lord. And it's something we share with all of you guys. Feel the weight of that. Now you understand why frequent sacrament of reconciliation, frequent sacrament of Eucharist is so important. It is that most intimate joining of the two bodies, me as the recipient and the body of the Lord. It is the consummation of our relationship with the Lord. It's the consummation of our initiation into the entire Catholic faith. Feel the weight of that. Now, the practices are meant to build this devotion, these attitudes. So I have a list of them, and some of them I will pass over because they're obvious, okay? Eucharistic adoration. Now, Eucharistic adoration has not always existed in the Catholic faith. It's existed for a long time. It's an ancient and venerable tradition. But the resurrection of the Eucharist was not always a thing that we did, until we recognized that the sick needed it, and they might need it at a time where it is not available because the priest is not saying Mass at 2 in the morning. So they started to preserve the Eucharist in the churches. Well, the good lay faithful recognized that the Eucharist is preserved in this church. I'm going to go there to pray, not only because the church is a place of closeness to God, but because God is physically present in the church, in the Eucharist. That's where Eucharistic adoration comes from. I would desire to be so close to the Lord that I wish to be in his physical presence as well as his spiritual presence. That there is something that you can do when God is present in the Eucharist that you cannot do in your home. Now, that being the case, you should pray in your home as well. Not everything can be done in the Mass. I understand. The Mass is the most important and most privileged prayer. Remember my analogy of the meal? You don't look at a meal and say, I want all Brussels sprouts. Instead, you take a steak, you take a potato, you take a scoop of the vegetables, you take a dessert, maybe you take a coffee, maybe you take a glass of wine. There are many elements to the meal. The Mass may be the most privileged of all of our prayers, but it is not the only one. The other element, most important element of Eucharistic devotion is participation in the Mass. Third is in the actual reception of the sacrament of communion. I'm going to skip over that because I talked about ones, here are some ones you may never have heard before. O sacrament most holy, O sacrament divine, all praise and all things to thee, be every moment thine. Feel free to look that up at a later moment. That is a Eucharistic devotion, one that is prayed after communion. We are supposed to, and by supposed to, I mean it's written in the books as an option. It's a preferential option. It's like you should try and do this unless you can. And many priests find many reasons to not do this. You're supposed to have silence after the time of receiving communion. Sometimes that's not entirely possible. For those of you who attend 9 o'clock Mass, you know why that's impossible. Because the church is so incredibly loud, even when we're not doing anything, that it's difficult to have actual silence. But actual silence is not as important as interior silence. Quiet yourself. In that time, you might say, O sacrament most holy, O sacrament divine, all praise and all things given be ever and moment thine. This is a prayer of Eucharistic devotion. This is an opportunity for you to do something with your own mind, body, and soul that educates you, your emotions and your experiences. Why is this important? When we expose the Blessed Sacrament in a few moments, no matter how well-formed you are, it still looks like bread. That never changes. And even in the most concise and clear doctrine of the real presence of the Eucharist, St. Thomas Aquinas makes it clear. The Eucharist still has the appearances of bread and wine. So it should be unsurprising to us that it looks like bread. So your soul has to be educated. You have to remind yourself that what I am seeing is not the reality. It's a sort of mirage. However, a mirage, of course, is sort of your own wishful thinking overlaid over what you see. This is very different. The interior reality has changed, and what we see remains. Only what used to be there. Another similar prayer, my King and my God. These are the words of one of the apostles, Thomas, when Thomas the doubter. Doubting Thomas, when he sees Jesus and puts his finger into his hand and his hand into his side, bends down on his knees, drops to his knees, and says, Jesus, my King, my God. There are 3 places in the celebration of the Eucharist where you might do this. At both of the 2 elevations, and then finally, as you genuflect before you receive the Eucharist. I wouldn't suggest doing both, just pick one place and do it there. My King and my God, again, educating your soul. Because what you see is not what actually is. And this is hard. There are many, 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 many examples of Eucharistic devotion. Pick a few and do them. At best, pick one and do it very well. This is not a contest of how many things you can do, but it is of quality. Because remember, the purpose of the devotion is to build your devotion. The purpose of your devotion is to build your love. The purpose of your devotion is to educate your soul so that your habits might be transformed and conformed to Jesus Christ. This is what it means to have Eucharistic devotion. Pick a few